The following video contains spoilers for the Danganronpa series. I will not hold back any story or character points that I wish to address. If you're saving the experience for yourself, I suggest you stop watching this video and come back once you do. If you don't care, then cool. More views for me. If you've been around me or my channel up to this point, then you should know that I have very conflicting thoughts on Danganronpa. You'd think a series about characters surviving through a killing game will make good room for some interesting story developments. But what came out instead was a strange mix of odd plots and gimmicky writing that I wonder if it even knows what it's trying to be. Does it want to tell a big, dark, and meaningful story? Then why break the immersion with aimless plot points and juvenile tropes to serve it? Does it just want to be a romp with a bunch of characters to have fun with? Then why do the characters keep getting brainwashed or killed off before they can be fully fleshed out? It's like the series wants to be riddled with dark comedy and mature story elements at the same time, but could never balance out the two properly. For those complaining that I'm being too acute with this series, let me just clarify that I do enjoy the first two games of the series. They have flaws, yes, but nothing I would consider to be a plague to the series. Given how much the second game improves over the first one, I'm excited to see just how far the series will go. But after going through the next few installments, I realized that this series really isn't as smart as it thinks it is. It became so proud of its gimmicks to the point where it pretty much stops evolving and got stuck in its own little world. And yet, despite all of this, I still enjoy talking about it. It's such a fun series to think about, especially knowing just how much you could do with the killing game formula. After some thorough contemplating, I was able to list down a few suggestions on how this series can be taken in other interesting directions. Let it be from how it handles its story, to its characters, and a few other ideas I think could help spice up the games a bit more. Now let me get this out of the way. I'm not gonna complain about how to improve writing individual characters. That's a whole different can of worms and delves more into subjective opinions. I will, however, address how these characters are affected by the elements to show which of the general aspects should be refined. I know odds are none of these points will matter to the main series since Decadence is already out, but perhaps these pointers can still be helpful for anyone who's out to write their own story, whether it's for killing games or in general. So, without further ado, let's address the ways Danganronpa can be improved. Number 1. Story versus character. Starting off, let's address the most fundamental aspect of the series that keeps it standing. Danganronpa consistently struggles to balance its priority when it comes to telling a story and fleshing out a character. This is because 1. The story usually doesn't make any progress into the last few chapters of the game, and 2. Having to balance between writing 16 characters, you'll undoubtedly wind up giving some of them less screen time to develop. Now this has been done right several times before. DR1 Chapter 2, V3 Chapter 1, and every chapter in DR2 save for 3 are capable of putting out interesting plotlines that make use of every involved character, as well as keeping their impacts relevant for most of the game. But fact still stands that it messes this up a lot. Many times we see characters who abruptly die without getting a fulfilling development. Oftentimes they're left out to be forgotten and any contributions they have to the plot are rendered moot. And sometimes their personalities even got viciously ruined either to advance the plot or just because Kodaka felt like shoving his weird ideas into them. The flop side can be just as problematic. Characters that live too long but don't develop or contribute to anything can make them feel like fodder. Their general presence can feel pretty distracting when they're just biding their time until the end of the game before they start doing something. Instead of having characters constantly battling the story, it's best to give in the time and thought to consider how the story can be written around the characters. Keep in mind how you're going to use every character in each case, as well as how you assign them in their roles. Victims, killers, or survivors alike. Now yes, not every character can be a Fuyuhiko or a Kaede, but there are plenty of well-developed characters that serve as good writing models in each role that you can take notes from. Adding on, the subplots should also make the most out of any potential ideas they could offer. Few things are worse than introducing an interesting idea and doing nothing with it. V3 Chapter 3, for example, had a perfect chance to make use of the resurrection idea by going through with Angie bringing back Rantaro. When Rantaro gets brought back, it could add to the crazy mystery of how that's possible, and reveal later that he was just another actor playing the same character. It adds a lot more to the twist that everything in V3 was just a game show, and makes more use out of a character that was originally just there to die first. But of course, that's not what we get since Kodaka had his head in his ass when he made V3. At the end of the day though, not everyone can be the best character. Whether we like it or not, 16 characters is a handful, and some of them do have to be sacrificed in oh so miserable ways so others can move on. How can we compensate for that? Well, let's look at the other steps. Number 2. Free time events. FTEs are the main sub-game of Danganronpa. This mode is supposed to give you a chance to learn more about the characters and extract more depth from them when they otherwise won't lack it throughout the main game. Whether or not this works depends if you care enough about the characters as they are in the main story, but that's only the subjective aspect of it. The main problem with FTEs is that it only locks you to character interactions with the protagonist. Because of that, we still lack seeing these characters actively interact with each other in the actual games. Interacting only with the protag actively limits the amount of topics they could discuss and the dynamics they could create. Given that this series features ensemble casts, that's a big problem. Now sure, if you like the protagonist, then maybe you'll enjoy these interactions just fine. But should it happen that you don't like the protagonist, then you'd surely rather see these characters interact with anyone else. V3 introduces Talent Development Plan, which expands into having the various characters play off of each other. Essentially the closest we get to a Fire Emblem Supports adaptation in the series. These games definitely should have had a system similar to this from the start. Just because you're playing as the main character doesn't mean you can't eavesdrop on your conversations. It'd be fun to see chemistries like Mondo and Chihiro, Kazuichi and Mahiru, and Kirumi and Korekiyo be expanded upon. Hell, the third one even happened in the anthology manga. And no, don't use mangas as an excuse to not expand your characters in-game. People who look out for these characters as video game characters will look into the games as the airtight source. The mangas are still free to add whatever they want, but you still gotta expand them where it counts. Number 3. Mystery and pacing. As a murder mystery franchise, it's obvious that mystery will be a vital component. One thing you should know is to understand how people think when playing these games since it affects their investment in your mystery building. Experienced mystery readers know to keep two things in mind. 1. To study the structure of the game's story and what direction makes sense for them to take when it comes to killing characters. 2. Decide the murder suspect before the class trial begins, preferably after the investigation. This is vital to keep in mind because part of what feeds into the mystery of each DR trial is who done it. In games like Ace Attorney, there are times where they didn't even try to hide who the culprit is. But with how obvious some of the culprits can get, they usually make up for it with an interesting process. Finding out how the murder is done, rather than who did it, is the key that makes a lot of Ace Attorney games consistently interesting. Danganronpa does have interesting how-tos, but most of them take so long to address because of, well, the minigames.
I know she stabbed him with a knife.
But can you spell the word knife?
The minigames are often the game's way of addressing conclusions that don't necessarily come with evidence. But they also take so long to do that you probably had already figured it out before the minigames even began. Yet another thing Ace Attorney does better is that their minigames are usually pretty simple and straight to the point. Plus they actually tie into the methods of investigation involved with the character's actions. I can understand debating with other classmates being a thing in Danganronpa since it utilizes the cast, but when's the last time you had to ram a bunch of hookers on the street just to figure out how a dead body was moved?
All girls!
No, Cyril, when they're dead, they're just hookers.
The poor pacing on DR trials does hurt the mystery solving experience and makes it too easy to figure out how a case plays out before you even solve it. It's fine for the first 2 games since you're still setting everyone's expectations up, but by the 3rd game, it got pretty tired. It's better to just click on words to answer a question than to spend minutes playing a pace-breaking minigame. If you're gonna insert minigames into the trials, you gotta make them short and sweet. The more time you have to spend on these, the more tedious the trial will get, and the less investing the mystery will be. Number 4. Twists and world building. Here's another aspect of mystery that you should know. A twist is only as good as the story. If the story is bad, then no matter how shocking or surprising your twist is, it's not gonna hold water in the long run. Danganronpa likes to make plot twists that's meant to get a shocking reaction out of you. Granted, this is done as part of the series' theme to subvert expectations of Japanese media. However, if you're experienced enough with games that do this sort of thing, that shock value won't even be all that effective anymore. And all that's left is the aftermath of what value these twists hold. An example of this is the final chapter plot twists, and how they usually reveal that the world outside is a lot more screwed up than the characters could imagine. Now, at first, this seems fine. It adds to the series' rambunctious tone and the mystery surrounding the mastermind's character. Unfortunately, when the time comes for them to add substance to these twists, we get DR3 giving Junko plot armor and ripping someone off of a brainwashing video. No intricate manipulation, no personal catharsis, her success just happens. Kind of hard to respect this prolific character when nothing she does is even the least bit believable. Hope Speak's clumsy and restrictive narrative pretty much led to V3 taking place on a separate timeline, yet still somehow sharing the same repeating traits as the other games. including the ending twist trying way too hard to be shocking but lacking the substance to make it hold up. Except this time, the mystery isn't even executed well since Tsumugi is such a bad leader and mastermind whose dialogue completely goes against what she stands for. The characters don't matter because they're all fiction? Lady, your whole career is dedicated to bringing fictional characters to life. You're invalidating your own work! On a positive side of things, Kaede does this sort of thing better, being a decoy protagonist who's not just there to shock the audience. We do see her as a genuinely decent person who naturally develops into the decision that she had to make in killing the mastermind to protect her friends. She's not just an idea of a decoy, she's also the story. The build-up and chemistry makes it less shocking but much more profound. Barring that, the best parts of the world building in this series are pretty much left as extra content in the various mangas and light novels. Even then, that's no better than locking a crucial piece of the plot behind DLC. All I'm saying is, think about how to manage your world building before you make your plot twists. Don't build your story on the plot twists, especially if you plan on continuing the story afterwards. Or better yet, you can refer to other fanworks as to how to expand upon the mystery of the plot twists. I've seen people make their own take on Junko manipulating the DR2 characters, and they were pretty good. It's cool to see how she actually sinks into their minds and convinces them to believe her. Something you won't find in DR3 due to the amount of corners they cut. Number 5. Fanservice and sexual themes. Now let me get this out of the way. I don't claim to be a white knight puritan when it comes to fanservice. I don't necessarily support it, but I understand that a lot of fictional media capitalize on it because it helps them business-wise. Danganronpa has an interesting relationship with its sexual themes. There are times where they try to parody the idea of fanservice by teasing us with it, only to rarely deliver, and moments where it uses these themes to support darker and more disturbing undertones of its story. But then there's also just times where they didn't even try to be subtle about it and just shove whatever half-naked character they feel like putting on screen. Like I said, I can settle with these approaches if it's handled well. Danganronpa is god-awful at it. The bevelly aesthetics and clumsy proportions in the CGs do not translate well into fanservice whatsoever. Adding on, the themes used with it for the sake of extruding those darker themes are wholly unprecedented for. Ultra Despair Girls especially portrays a lot of these gross and shocking undertones without any thought and understanding on why they're as heavy as they are. It's literally the sort of disgusting stuff you find in bad fanfiction everywhere. And then there's the series' mascot of fanservice subversion, Mikan Sumiki. For a character that's supposed to be a parody on how much nurse archetypes are always looted to hell and back, she was not handled well whatsoever. We're supposed to feel bad for her because of what she had to go through to get attention, but the story treats her so much like a joke that it sends mixed messages on whether she's supposed to be taken seriously or not. Don't even get me started on how DR3 completely dropped all that subtlety and made her into the exact type of hoe she's supposed to be parodying. Assuming she's even subtle to begin with. Yeah, in general, the series could do without any more poorly made fanservice. Decadence really tries to double down on it, and it didn't look any better there either. In short, if you really want to do fanservice, start with actually making them good. If you're gonna do subversions or use sexual themes for dark storytelling, take it seriously. Or you know, the series is already doing well with a lot of fanworks getting easy attention, so how about just don't. Leave all that stuff to the less orthodox members of the community. Number 6. Protagonists. A keystone to good storytelling is having a protagonist that plays off of the story adequately. Unfortunately, that's rarely a strong suit when it comes to Danganronpa. Let's face it, the average DR protagonist is just your average insecure beta male who needs to go on a journey to find his self-confidence. Not saying it can't be handled well, characters like Hajime have proven that it can work. But knowing that it's good and done then, there's not really much left to do with this archetype. I know, the main character serves as a player insert to connect with the other characters more personally, but that's a filmsy excuse to not brand them with more personality. Komaru and Kaede have shown that you can do different protagonists in the series and still hit the jackpot. Problem is that one is from a spin-off and the other is, well, you know. Don't be afraid to try more attitude-driven protagonists. Maybe even have ones that are defined by their actions. That way it's easier to respect their fortitude instead of just projecting your own onto them. Hell, there's no shortage of protagonist ideas that tie to the killing game itself. Maybe even have one that knows about the killing game and willingly participates in it to investigate the mystery more personally. Or how about a protagonist who introduced as the mastermind but participates as someone who's trying to redeem the killing game from the inside. That way, they know everything about the killing game and have access to certain areas, but keep it a secret from everyone else or they'd become the primary lynching target for the cast. It even opens up a lot of potential for the protagonist to banter more personally with Monokuma, or whatever game host you want to put in your story. That's just one of the few interesting ways you can take the story of the killing game instead of recycling the Kodaka formula just to look cool. It is a mystery series after all, you gotta surprise people with new things. Number 7. Antagonists. Now when I say antagonists, I'm not just talking about rival characters or the occasional sociopathic mid-case culprit. Those generally come down to how well you write the characters on their own. I'm talking about masterminds, or rather, the main villains. For whatever reason, the only mastermind archetype that lives rent-free in Kodaka's mind are deranged freak accidents with the personality of a 2009 YouTube poop video. Sure, it's funny. Yes, the mystery surrounding them can work if it's kept hidden, but in the grand scheme of things, they're not good characters. For all the crazy acts they've done hyping them up to high heaven, when you actually fight them, all they do is rub lies and despair in your face over and over again to the point where the Westboro Baptist Church looks subtle in comparison. Monica is the only good villain out of all of them because she's the only one who has defined aspects that make her a character. Her backstory and the conclusion of her arc serves as a cautionary tale as to what happens when both Hope's Peak and Junko's Despair Legion gets too deluded in their ideals to the point where they only antagonize themselves and nothing gets resolved. So how about we grow out of the Junko phase and try something else for a change? A mastermind with some actual depth and chemistry with the story and theming of the games that goes beyond a big joke. Oh, but Count, you can't not have Junko be the villain. It's not Danganronpa without Junko. That's just the kind of Stockholm mentality Kodaka wants to put you in. Doesn't mean everyone has to follow it. Here's a few ideas I have for potential DR villains. A villain who is a participant of a killing game trying to play and win, so they viciously manipulate their classmates to their deaths to save themselves up to the end of the game. It's similar to Byakuya and Kokichi but with actual villainous intent, to the point where they don't openly announce that this is what they're doing. It could work well with the mastermind protagonist idea as well, since it'll be a battle between a redeeming villain and a participant who glorifies the killing game. Here's another one. A mastermind who created a killing game to test the protagonist and see what decisions they will make as part of a research. One of the meta aspects of the killing game is seeing which character becomes the point of interest for a lot of audiences. So having a mastermind who concentrates on protecting the character that's either really beloved or really hated could be a fun way to toy around with that concept. And finally, imagine multiple people running a killing game. Not everyone will have the same motive, so each of them will start fighting over the authority as the mastermind behind the scenes. A fun aspect of this is the idea that it throws people off of the expectations on who the real big bad is. It simmers down the slow burn from being able to predict the mastermind almost immediately. Looking at you, Sumugi. Overall, the same thing applies here with the protagonist. Just like how a variety of protagonists can work in a killing game, there's a lot of ways to do a variety of masterminds or main villains for it as well. So, get out of that Enoshima box and start putting out your ideas for a change. Number 8. Cast Intelligence. After DR2, I think DR fans can be comfortable with a cast of smarter characters that don't always have to rely on the guidance of MVPs. So I think it's high time we move out of the MVP phase and try for a cast that's genuinely more intelligent. One of the things that always bothers me is that 80% of all the characters in the games are either helpless idiots who had to rely on the smart kid of the group, or introduced with some degree of intellect only for them to get stupider to make the select few characters look good. V3 is by far the worst offender of this. The characters were mostly competent at investigating in Chapter 1, but from there on, everyone just leaned on Suichi and Kokichi to do all the dirty work for them. Characters like Korekiyo, Miu, Maki, and especially Kibo grow from prominent intellectuals to brain-dead tits whenever the plot demands them to. Now don't get me wrong, having a prominent smart character can still work in the story, but it has to make sense. If a character is bent on winning a killing game, then it's obvious they have to get the smart one out of the way so that they can win. Doesn't mean the smart one had to die, but the story can still be written around that idea. These are ultimate talents after all. Intelligence has to play a big part to some degree. Number 9. Depth versus focus. This is sort of an extension of story versus characters, but focuses mainly on the general writing of the characters themselves. Let's be real here, 16 characters are a lot. You're not gonna have the brain power to flesh out all of them. Kodaka continues to prove this with each passing installment. No matter the screen time, the free time events, or the talent development plans, not every idea will be on board when it comes to putting a character together because, let's face it, Kodaka is just one guy. Like most artists and writers, he focuses on fleshing out topics and ideas that interests him the most. As such, there will be stragglers, and said stragglers will face the bare minimum when it comes to character development. One of the biggest offenders of this is Gonta Gokuhara, a character with a unique concept being an entomologist who is raised outside of the urban environment. What he lacks in book smarts, he makes up for it with survival skills and knowledge about nature. Unfortunately, all he turned out to be is the stereotypical gentle giant who gets played around by other mischievous characters. That's literally all he is from start to finish. And actions? What actions? He's a filler character. Nothing he does means anything in the grand scheme of Kodaka. The complete lack of depth on Gonta's character beyond being someone too pure for this world makes his character arc feel very manipulative. FTEs and TDPs don't add much to him either other than a bunch of aimless jokes. As someone who loves Gonta and wanted to see more of him, it feels downright insulting how little he's treated like an actual character. At the same time though, I'm not going to hold it against Kodaka for this. Mainly because as someone who has attempted to write his own Danganronpa fan work, I've felt this sentiment before. I too have characters that I don't have enough passion to flash out, and mainly have them there to fill up space. So I do know what it feels like to be on a burnout with ideas, and I can't say I like it. This is why you shouldn't be afraid to ask for other people's input. Perspective varies, and different people will have different passions to show. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who know how to tie the ideas of entomology with the killing game. You are writing 16 characters, you can't hope to fill all their blanks alone. Or better yet, you could try to shrink down the cast. If 16 is too much, you can try like 12 instead. Fewer characters means you'll be able to focus on each individual storyline better, without worrying about the fatty parts. What's there to say but quality over quantity? Yes, decreasing the amount of characters does mean you have to shrink the game down as well. It won't be fun to do that if you're trying to make a big game with a lot of invested playtime. This feeds into another idea I have in mind, branching paths. Danganronpa is a mystery-driven visual novel. It could certainly use branching paths to create a more immersive and interesting story that connects to the choices you make. I know what-if scenarios are usually the kiss of death for a lot of stories, but with DR, it's perfect because given how much focus is given to the promotion of the cast, you'd likely have some you want to see survive. Having multiple paths gives you the option to potentially save some of the characters you like. Though when I say save, I don't necessarily mean they will make it out alive. Look at that however you may. Creating multiple paths will take a lot of time and effort, which is why trimming the cast and amount of chapters can help enhance the focus on each character. This is more of a suggestion than an advice, but it doesn't hurt to experiment with it if it means finding ways to subjugate the depth and focus problem. Number 10. Tropes and gimmicks. Oh boy, here we go. One of the defining traits of the series' personality is the meta humor in which it makes fun of a lot of tropes you typically see in a lot of Japanese media. Unfortunately, this series too succumbs to the kinds of tropes it typically mocks. I already mentioned the desperately shocking twists, the poor fan service, and repeated character archetypes, but even the mystery-solving part of the game isn't free from this trap. It doesn't take a genius to notice that every DR game repeats the same death and survivor formulas over and over again. While it's not prevalent in the first two cases, the third case always have two murders done by a crazy killer, the fourth case always kills the big buff guy, the fifth case is where the important characters die, and at least one of the survivors fulfills some sort of overexposed trait that makes them into the obvious survivor. These traits not only made each case easy to figure out, but it also has no real story justification to it. They acknowledge the repeated trends, but why they're there and why it's necessary was never addressed. So really, it's just a lazy formula done with self-awareness just for the sake of it. All it's ever going to do is sour your story and hurt your credibility as a mystery writer. And believe me, I don't like it when Ace Attorney does it either, so ain't no way in hell I'm giving DR a free pass. V3 especially is so bad with this. The forced double murder plot in chapter 3 only serves to draw Miss Potential to what the resurrection subplot could have been, and I've already gone on length as to why Gonta's arc in chapter 4 doesn't work. And what, the whole thing being a game show for 53 seasons is supposed to justify the repeated tropes? That doesn't even make sense since developers realistically will put a spin on a formula to keep things interesting. I don't care if it's a style. If you're gonna make me spend 60 plus hours of my time and resources on a visual novel that's twice the price of its previous installments, the least you could do is make the story worthwhile. Sorry about that. Flashbacks to similar grievances do things to my head. Danganronpa is a series that celebrates outputting crazy ideas in a mature storytelling. But despite that, it's still just like any other work of art. It's not immune to criticism and leaves a lot of room for improvement. Executing crazy ideas is bound to lead you to making a product that garners mixed receptions. hence why you shouldn't be afraid to take criticisms over it. Kodaka's not perfect, not everything he puts out always gets the exact reaction he wanted, and he's surprisingly open-minded about it. I give the guy a hard time, but I do believe he's a morally upstanding developer, being grateful to his community and wanting to see them mingle with his product in any way they so wish. An attitude we could only praise some developers could nurture. Fan-made Danganronpa has become a rising culture in the community, kick-started by the hype of Rebirth and success of the Another Despair Academy series. There's gonna be room for more fan products to come, so will these games branch out and do their own thing, or are they gonna continue staying under Kodaka's armpit? Only time and a compassionate degree of patience can tell. Thank you for watching. I hope this video was worth extending Danganronpa month for like twice the size. If you like it, feel free to subscribe and let me know your thoughts. If you hate it and think I'm a fool who doesn't know what I'm saying, feel free to comment about it too. Now then, I think I'll be taking a break from all this bullet refutation business. See you all whenever I got another topic to spawn.